thrilled to have you back to this our show, Think Tech Hawaii's Humane Architecture, episode number 292nd. And the accumulated viewer you are, thanks to you, Michael, we see down there. We have to go back to the other windy city of Chicago for a couple more times because we are about to find out why we get so many pieces of architecture, parts of Skyline, architectural authorship-wise from there. So see you for that in a sec. And us is you, DeSoto, in your home, in your Ossipoff designed easy breezy home, and me very close to you, not as easy breezy in the moment because you have birds and dogs as the tropical background.
Yes.
I would have all these combustion engines if I would sit on my lanai on Kapahulu Avenue. For that reason, I'm with my fan here, which you have one too, but you need it more, you need it less than I do. Anyway, so Martin Despang, me and my Waikiki Grant. So we jump back to Chicago, where thanks to your computer being back to live, you are with us. So to brief you in, last week, we stopped on this river here. It's actually a side arm of the Chicago River. And we looked into an interesting similarity between what my father did in the early 80s and what Harry Weese did in the early 80s is something that we call adaptive reuse. In my father's case, although he was environmentally very much still holding on to Jimmy, who was, by the way, running by that at that time still, luckily. But already sort of pointing out into the runny phase, which was more excessive as far as square footage, because he was converting a former multi-story apartment building into a single-family residence, which was a little bit upscale, but I guess business must have been doing well at that time. So and Harry was doing adaptive reuse in a more extreme way, because he was converting a building that was not even a dwelling into a dwelling, and that's the red brick building we see at the top right. But before we go back, we want to look at the river DeSoto and discuss water, because at the bottom left is you back in Chicago some little while ago, as one can tell. And so you did not experience the riverfront as something very, very compelling, because there was no such thing as at least not as really walkable and enjoyable. That has ever since changed. And one of the projects we have been actually showing and sharing a piece of it, which is at the center at the bottom there, is that part where they went very tiki-ish. And talking tiki, what kind of event do we go to this afternoon?
Well, we're going to something about tiki texture. And I am going to be very curious to see what this is like. It's being put on at Group 70 Architectural Firm in downtown Honolulu. And one of, as you just mentioned, the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. It's housed in what used to be the main downtown branch of the Bank of Hawaii. And the building is in the Financial Plaza of the Pacific, built in 1968. And that building was built specifically for the bank. What has happened, and this is really relevant for reuse, many bank branches have closed or even been demolished because banking is now pretty much almost done exclusively online. So that frees up a number of buildings that formerly housed physical banks to become something else.
Absolutely. And it's a Docomomo Talk Story event. So please, everyone out there, join us for these. Talking tiki and the last remaining pieces of it that we even have left. I will bring the brochure that, of course, it's not the oldest one, because that one you have as our treasurer of the past, but I will bring this one here. And I think I just talked to Michael before the show. We should have Ethel on a show, who has worked there since 55 when it opened, so she's really a great source. So let's
Yes.
plan on that one.
Yeah,
Going back to rivers, we as the three. I'm going to be back in Munich, and that's at the center of on the column of the left was me some few years ago here. The picture of me floating here submerged in the water was taken by Joey, who just turned 30. So happy birthday again, Joey. And so my mother's birthday was also a few days before there. So happy birthday to all of you. And this is the river Isar that comes down from the Alps. And this is in downtown Munich, a crystal clear river. And aren't you in Chicago, where we see it's not quite as crystal clear, wasn't when you were there from the color and isn't when I was there a year ago. And the one, is it the Nuuanu stream that comes down by the American Savings Bank, which we see show quoted at the top left? Doesn't have that crystal clear color either. So there's a lot of improvement to learn from us there in Munich, right?
Yeah, and you told me you went swimming, and here's the picture of you actually in this river. And I am still in disbelief that a river coming through a major city could be as clean as this and could also have a natural embankment on either side of it. It's not a concrete lined structure, which it normally is in most American cities, but instead a natural stream bed with beautiful water. How could that be?
Absolutely. Or, to promenade on its edge, which is the riverfront or the river walk, right? And we see for us, there's no way there to walk right at the river. There is the street level, and then there is the urban nomad encampment there. So there's a lot of improvement there. And the sidearm of the Chicago River also doesn't have the buildings are pretty much fronting the river. So there isn't any chance to have public access to it. But if you do detective work, and that's what we do, I found out that the author, the landscape architect who did the pretty lovely waterfront in Chicago, and there will be another project we're going to show in the future here in a couple of the next episodes, that is by the great famous architect Norman Foster, that we kept talking about quite a bit. And we, in fact, at the beginning of the year, visited with the emerging generations, and we talked about it, one of his pioneers in bioclimatic design in the city of Duisburg. So he did the Apple Store, and that's right at the river and is integrated into the riverfront. We will show that in a couple of episodes. And the landscape architect's name is, as we show there at the bottom middle, is called Sasaki. So this is a firm that reminded me of something, and that gets us to the next slide. And this is Sasaki. This is the company, and there's some good news here, because this firm has been approached by my employer, the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and particularly by the Department of Tropical Plants and Soil Sciences, CTAR, for their property up there in Manoa Marketplace, where they have, aquaponics and hydroponics and plant studies going on. And they approached this landscape architect here to do studies. And prior to that, we were approached as the Tropic Hearing team, and the tropical structural skin is a result of that one. And thanks again, DeSoto, for having been on our jungleism review gallery exhibit on Monday. And you had some very lively discussions with the emerging generation. And I'm sure some of them asked you the same question, because they asked me that before, and we're deferring to you. And they said, hey, would actually tropical brutalism work for us on some other parts of the island? So this tropical structural skin that you see on the right side of this image, of this page here, is actually the answer yes. As long as you flush the thermal mass of concrete, that is the only downside, or the main downside of tropical brutalism. It's massive, so it has a lot of thermal mass that can overcharge. But if you flush that with a continuously cool trade winds, you get this out all the time. And that's why it works. Happens, your architect of your childhood, Osipov, also designed my favorite classroom, which is not in the architecture building, but in the planning department building's front yard, which is an open lanai that's covered from the top, that's Saunders Hall, and it's open from the sides, and the concrete in there is always cool because constantly flushed by the wind and kept out of the sun. So kind of a neo-tropical brutalism. This is a case study for that, or a cheerleading of that would work, as we believe.
And I also want to point out too that in the structure that we're looking at here, vegetation plays a large role in also keeping that cool too. So if you have plants that are growing within the structure, they provide shade, as well as trees around the structure will also provide shade. So you can make use of natural vegetation to help cool the structure as well, because plants need full sun in order to function. They are healthy for us by giving off oxygen, and they also provide shade because they want the sun, and we like having the shade underneath them.
Thank you. So telepathic you to mention that, because that's a little funny thing here is that, Thomas reached out to both of us, us first, and then Zazaki here. And I guess they're kind of separate from each other. And I guess the collaboration, we have a landscape department within our school that recently got accredited. And so there's really kind of the necessity of joint venturing in between. And so I wouldn't have mind, here as well, that basically Zazaki would have been, because we were walking their direction, as you really point out, because this is archi-nature as much as it is architecture, right? And it's architecture too, but the texture is comprised of porous pixels of the openings of these concrete elements, and then there is greenery inside. So again, we're opting for an early kind of joint venturing between the experts as architects and then the landscape. Thomas, who we shall quote at the very top right here in this is actually the predating show Urban Descendants. It's so that long ago, it's 8 years ago. And we called it The Bigger Picture. I guess Thomas' response then towards the end was like, well, isn't it a little bit too heavy? Isn't it a little bit too brutalist, right? And there we go. So there is this prevailing. Yesterday, I saw in my German architects online newsletter that there's another exhibit. There is the one about brutalism in the German Architectural Museum, where your architect Osipov has been exhibited by Dean Sakamoto a while ago. And now the SOS brutalism exhibit made it there. And there is another one in the home country of my mother in Austria right now, Austrian brutalism. So brutalism, we're really looking back into brutalism as nothing brutal, but as something to be inspired. So Thomas, you wouldn't have had to be afraid of this. But getting now to something that's really brutal, that's the next slide, because it had to be. And this is the epitome of thermal mass, because while people could have not lived in that one, what it was built for, very much so, that was ice. This is a cooling house that is there to keep ice cool. So it speaks for, it really puts us in our face, right? That thermal mass, was it good for? To keep things thermally conditioned. In this case, you keep it cool, right? Openings would have leaked that coolness, right? And doesn't that drawbridge here look familiar to you, DeSoto? Because that's the one we saw on the very first slide, right? Next to that brick building. And if this would have been a color picture, that big chunk would have been red. And this is, believe it or not, but you better believe it, is that same building. Before Harry Wees was commissioned to basically dig in. Well, now what we put over it, we want you to read through this text here. It basically says, Jay was talking to us about island economies and how they're different from other places. And then you still pick up natural light, and it affords you a big living area right off your kitchen. And then we also did not put in operable windows in the building. You were quoting and addressing that in the review, DeSoto, in the building. And that was a choice. It really came down to economics. Replacing all of the glass in that building would have made the project too expensive, right? And this is a quote: "For the recent residences at Bishop Place between Bishop Street and 4th Street Mall, where you will be on a panel that Bundet organized on Friday, while you excuse me because I have to go to the doobies in our front yard."
Yeah.
And right, so this is talking about an 80s Pomo building that they converted, as we were just talking, adaptive reuse from office to residential. And this argument, we just put it over there to show how ironic that is, right? Because these people, did they use this argument? No, because next slide is just showing again what I talked about, because your computer was down last time. Isn't that a unit you would like to be in? And it's not even so expensive. It's big 3-bedroom for $775K was some years ago. Yes, grantedly, but it has ample daylight. It has awesome vaulted brick ceilings because it's from 1900 something. And you guess what? What does it have on the right side down there?
It's got a lanai. I can see chairs on it, and I can see a railing.
So isn't that ironic, right? There's an ice chest storage building, right, that had nothing, not even one window, right? Here they're debating, okay, do you give daylight and fresh air to a bedroom, while when we sleep, we also have to breathe, right? And here they're taking a whole hermetic big chunk of a building and basically perforating it, and not just with little windows in there, but also a lanai. And that little thing below there is likely a heating, because we should not forget, this is getting like in your childhood when your parents dragged you out to Boston, a little further east, and where I grew up. This gives us these chills from memory, right? This is getting 20, 30 below with a wind chill. And so there's only a few months in a year that you can sit out there, but they do it regardless, or maybe they do it because of that, right? And obviously then, not to be confused, the J they're quoting is not our J, our founding uncle J. Fidel, because he would have never said that, but this is J. Scheidler. J. Scheidler gave his name to the business school next door at UH, and he's a real estate developer, so he's behind that, and that is really quite. And we were blessed to have one of his staff members on the review on Monday, and she is very critical of what her leadership there is saying and where it's thinking, which is great, because people need to step up and confront that and these kind of cheap excuses, literally and figuratively speaking, right? Next slide is also something quoting that we've been looking at a while ago. This is also Chicago is, although it seems so far east from us, and even if you're on the continental US, it feels pretty much way east already, but it's actually technically Midwest, right? And so the next town over for me to the big city of Chicago when I was a student was in my 72 Plymouth Fury on cruise control 8-9 hours straight, right? You can do that. And the building here is ever since my school days, my favorite building, that we are blessed to have a building by the architect I.M. Pei as well, from way earlier. This was in the mid-70s, 76, and East-West Center is from the 60s, right? From your childhood.
Yep.
And around the corner, we were just remembering, you shook hands with whom?
I shook hands with President Johnson in 1966, who was on his way up to the East-West Center in a motorcade, and it stopped on the corner of University Avenue and Dole Street, and I got to shake his hand. But he was going to the I.M. Pei designed, fairly newly opened East-West Center on the fringes of the UH campus.
Yeah, and our ongoing detective work being all over the place, and our other show with auto and architecture. We see him soon. Where and what a car?
What?
A floating car.
A floating car?
An MP car.
Oh, that's great. That's an amphicar that we're going to see very soon.
Yeah. So this building here again in 76 was after the main oil crisis that you remember, I don't. And these big boats, as my 72 Plymouth Fury, were lined up before the gas station. So I always, as an assignment, I did what they called in walk-architecture, the emerging generation in Nebraska. We walked, and I basically did what we addressed in the review. Right? We said, have no oil tankers come anymore, no supply of fossil fuel, no shipping containers. Then things that we were talking about would likely happen. And I said this here too. What would happen if the power lines go down, which they do in ice storms, right? You don't have any. Which is the building you survived the longest? And the conclusion was the 76, originally National Bank of Commerce, now bought by Wells Fargo, banked by IMP. And this is the east elevation there, where you see emerging talent Matt DeBoer, who has moved on since big times, here standing there and soaking it up. And, it would be perfect for us because this is the east elevation there in the morning. And you see that the sun is coming around and there's very little sun there. Well, in Chicago, this is good for the summer too, which we have the endless summers, but in the winter, it's kind of bad. But this building, grantedly, also top left show quotes, you see the southern side of it, and it has deep setbacks and it's all glazed. So this building is really sculptured around because it learned the lesson from that oil crisis, from that shock. There was a wake-up call. But again, my Plymouth Fury was 72, and that number reminds us of next slide. The building that now the whole discussion of converting office spaces into dwelling continues to be here. And this is from great Steve Owen. I have to correct myself. You're a way better one-man show. I'm not at all. So last time I was sort of, when I listened to the show, it's always painful for me, but this time it was more painful than before, because what I wanted to say is that some architects, and I said stubbornly, and Ron, forgive me for that, I meant this in a good way. He stayed true, together with Larry Stricker and Ed Killingsworth, to their agenda of high modernism and never even got sidetracked by any of the zeitgeist changes. Well, there's some architects who put their flag in the wind, I was saying, and people that come to my mind is Philip Johnson, or locally maybe John Paul Rumstead, although that is unfair as well because his early work. But later he got a little very much sidetracked into the Hermetic kind of Reaganishy kind of 80s, right? But Steve was fully immersing himself into brutalism through which we miss, and they haven't, replaced it as they were saying they need to tear it down. That was Ward Plaza as a tropical brutalist building that we once had an on-site event before they tore it down. Or this perfect building here, the Davis Pacific Plaza, right? So he was basically doing this here, and then he was doing Ward Warehouse in his own house and all the hippie-ish stuff, and they're all just as good. He was like totally jumping into the style and living it up, right? And that's the difference to the many copycatting people who were just jumping on the trends and then just pretending, but they didn't really understand it. But Steve jumped in and did both just as well. And this building here, I keep, thinking about everything we talked on the review is too big in our lifetimes to ever happen. But taking one of these floors, this floor here, right, where it's already been stripped naked, and then taking off that glass, and then I'm walking daily. I have a new friend who is Sherwin at the AO Cultural Center in the Outrigger Canoe Club that you need to get to know. And he has lots of artifacts there, and they introduce, native practices to the tourists coming through. They have one of the small bonsai canoes done by Keli'I in her early work under her master Bowman, and they got all this stuff. And we keep talking about, he says, when I come home, I throw my clothes off, and I said, so do I. So this is kind of a practice, right? A tropical practice. So why not trying things like that on this floor here? Or, on the other floors, if you want to play it safe, on the top right, there's Thomas Auer from Transolar with Tum. And, the jealousies, the glass jealousies, the German ones that you could maybe do, as Derek Correa or other upcoming emerging talent was saying, Martin, isn't maybe as a compromise to start with, sort of transitional before we go maybe fully back, or do something like a split system. And so Then these insulated double or triple pane glazed jalousies, frameless, would, keep the cold that you condition there better. So Thomas already said, thumbs up and heads up, I can model that. I can energy model that. But that's all what goes through our minds, right? And that would be really, this is my favorite picture now, been for ever since I saw this on the news, right? Because Steve was doing what we did, with a school cafeteria, an exoskeleton out of concrete, right? There's no extra column grid. The ribbons in the facade is the structure, and then there is the core. So same thing as the tropical structural skin, right? Have the breeze go through, and you're always feeling good. You're feeling good, as we see. You got the birds, you got the dogs, you got the windows open. I only have I don't have a cross ventilation. I have a double loaded corridor that's open to the end, but I'm not supposed to keep the door open because of fire, protection and stuff like that. But even with me, you have the cross ventilation. We even see it there from the two windows. I only have one side ventilation, and it's good enough for me. So we should really, I'm obsessed, as you can tell, with the idea of, starting small with one floor and doing all the practices that would be a little bit a show quote top right of Primitiva 2, right? It's pretty much the same idea in a new building, to have these cocoons as a transitional device to go from overdressed to Marlowe and Tata again. Maybe the cocoons are the mediating thing for the time being. Anyways, we got a minute left that I'll leave for you.
Okay. And where are we going now?
You mean next?
Yeah, are we going to the next slide, or are we just chatting about this?
I think we stay here because we move on to Chicago, and to other projects.
Okay.
But
the last thing I think we can add is for those who don't know, Martin, in your classes you teach a type of, really just to remind everybody, the reuse of buildings like this that are high-rise buildings to turn them into something else. And we talk about easy breezy, we talk about living closer to nature, we talk about natural ventilation. And just to make that clear, in a situation like this, what we would be doing would be removing all the glass entirely and leaving, as you said, the exoskeleton of the building to be what people live in, and then creating smaller environments within that if the inhabitants choose that and want that, as well as bringing back natural elements like plants, like fish, to try to not only improve the feeling of living in there, but also to potentially provide food for people too. So this is kind of a theoretical way to look at the high-rise structures that we have by the hundreds here in Honolulu, to reuse them in ways that are more environmentally friendly and also get people back to a more healthy lifestyle, not only physically, but mentally as well. So this is turning buildings, which currently are all hermetically sealed for the most part, into things which, again, are open to the air, as people have lived in for centuries and thousands of years before we turned into urban people.
Great summing it up. Thank you. And see you tonight for the tiki texture and talking easy breezy as courtesy of Keli'I-chan. We hopefully see lots of artwork in there because she is the in-house architect. And until then, stay, guess what? Easy breezy and breezy easy. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much for watching Think Tech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.